and I will step out of the way and let Diane take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. We're really pleased that Manos Antoninos, who's the director of the GEM report, the Global Education Monitoring Report at UNESCO, for joining us. Manos knows that despite the focus of the 2020 report on inclusion in education, many advocates of persons with disabilities and persons with disabilities have really been concerned that including persons with disabilities in education has not always been at the center of monitoring of the Sustainable Development Goals and looking at education overall. I think that this report really shines an excellent spotlight on the complexity of moving forward in education, taking advantage of advances, but also the risks that that can have for inclusion and for exclusion. So Manos, over to you to highlight the results of your investigations.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you, Sue, also for the kind words in introducing. I hope you can hear me clearly, because I had some problems with the connection as you were talking, and I was wondering whether it was me. So please do interrupt me if you cannot hear very well what I'm saying. One additional word of introduction: you mentioned the report and whether it focuses sufficiently on disability. The report these days tends to have more attention on the half that discusses the theme, but do not forget that there is always the other half, which is the monitoring of progress towards the goals. And this year we also have a short section where we discuss the disaggregation of education indicators by disability. And this is a way to introduce quietly the addition of the disability dimension in our World Inequality Database on Education, which we had announced also earlier at the time we were working on the inclusion report. It has not been a straightforward analysis. It's more complicated than it seems, and more complicated than we would have liked, but it's now there, and it calls for a debate and a discussion on how to do that better. But I step back from that piece of information and come to the theme of the 2023 report, which I think already the introductions alluded, is a topic that sparks a lot of debate. Technology does tend to lead people to take extreme positions, with optimism and pessimism. Of course, for many of us, we're beyond that, but it's quite enticing to pose some of the questions in terms of dilemmas. For instance, one option is that technology democratizes knowledge. It provides unfiltered access to all human intelligence, but some worry that actually it threatens choice, it threatens democracy by allowing a select few to control that information. Some people see that it offers boundless opportunities, but others worry that it may be leading us towards a technology-dependent future from which it might be very difficult to return. Some say, and of course, in the case of disability, it does so, it leads towards leveling the playing field, the opportunities for people to access education. Others point out that, in fact, it privileges a few and exacerbates inequality. And while we want everyone to have the right skills from the young age to navigate the complex digital world, some have concerns about the risk to the development of children if they're exposed to education, to digital education too early. So, as with all the topics that this report is dealing with, we face challenges, especially the common challenge, which is how to present a globally representative picture. Sue mentioned how important this topic is in the United States, but we have to work with a wide variety of countries, even countries where there is no electricity in schools. Whereas on the other opposite extreme, there might be countries that are practicing advanced technologies like facial recognition in classrooms. Our mandate is broad in one sense, but also limited in another. What we have to look at every theme we tackle is how does it contribute to the achievement of SDG 4, our global education goal. And in many ways, and that's a big question mark, many countries today are aspiring to achieve access to education levels and learning levels that rich countries have been enjoying already before the advent of the digital age. In that sense, and that's a key reason behind the title, we have recognized the role of technology first and foremost as a tool and not as a solution, blanket solution, because countries can achieve the objectives that they have set even without technology. But we faced also other challenges, and I'm going to now share my screen so that I can go to the main part of the presentation. So the big challenge for us was the use of evidence. And one of the obstacles for having a proper analysis of what is happening is that things are changing very, very rapidly. Now, they are changing rapidly, but it's also fair to say, and that's something that often is not discussed, that technology has not yet transformed education. This graph that we have here, which might disappear in a few seconds from your eyes, shows the percentage of countries, mainly upper, middle, and high income countries, where students in lower secondary school were exposed to the use of devices for at least 1 hour per week in their science and mathematics lessons. And you see that on average, it's only about 10% of students. So even in the world's richest countries, a minority of students are really seeing their education transformed through the medium of technology. There are a few countries, Denmark, Sweden, Australia, where 1 in 3 students are exposed, where you could say that in school education, things are being transformed, but even some of them are having cold feet. Sweden, maybe you have heard in the news recently announced that we're going to drop the use of devices in classrooms and return to paper. Technology, nevertheless, is growing very rapidly. The sector most affected is higher education. Enrollment in mass open online courses grew to at least 220 million people, and that excludes China, in basically just 10 years. At the same time, and that goes back to the point of whether technology has or has not transformed education, there are huge disparities in the use of technology by income, by education level, by the preparedness of teachers, and of schools as well. Only half of the schools in the world are even connected to the internet, and even among those that are connected, we don't know really whether it is being used for education. The big issue for us was to turn the usual question on its head and say, not how can we apply technology in education, but ask what are the main problems in education today, and can technology be a part of the solution rather than the solution? The big questions are equity and inclusion, quality of education, and efficiency. And I'm going to take you through those. But before I do that, here was our main problem. Good impartial evidence on the effectiveness of the use of technology in education is rare. That is partly because education evolves so fast that with products changing every 3 years or so, that it's impossible for the pace of research to match that speed. But we do know, therefore, that technology is generally adopted with very little evidence. Okay, this example may be a little bit extreme. We don't expect all products to have randomized trials, but in the UK, only 7% do. And at most, 18% did some type of study, research study behind it. So 4 and 5 adoptions of technology are done basically without evidence. And even the little evidence that exists is often very narrow and tends to be led by those who are trying to sell it. The outcome often being that those who have tried to do independent assessments often contradict some of those findings. But let's go to the three main education questions. Equity. Technology, of course, offers millions an opportunity, a window for accessing education, but at the same time, it excludes many more. And the report is not only about digital technologies, about ICTs. In fact, I should say the report is also covering other technologies outside the ICTs, even construction or energy in the monitoring part. And it even captures the reverse relationship. How can education technology, which in one way may be the most important question of the two, rather than how technology affects education. But within ICTs, we looked at a broad range, especially established technologies, and we have evidence that what we call now low tech has been important in reaching millions of learners in the past. In Mexico, TV in secondary education helped increase enrollment over 4 decades by a fifth, which is really substantial, about millions of learners. And we know, of course, also that these days we cannot talk about the right to education without really having meaningful connectivity. Connectivity has become a basic public service that needs to be delivered to everyone. And yet we know that during COVID, no distance learning was available for 72% of the world's poorest populations. But technology does have a transformative impact when it comes to number of groups, especially learners with disabilities. And that's something perhaps is the most powerful, the most impressive achievement of what technology offers these days to education. But we're looking forward to the discussion that will follow on that topic. Still, the same challenges affect disability and the use of technology. There are multiple of technology that help learners with different types of impairment to access education opportunities, and we can discuss perhaps later in more depth the advantages and disadvantages of some of these uses. But we also know that it is a promise in many parts of the world. Technology is unequally distributed, and only a fraction of people can have access to the technology that exists. And yet, it is critical, and we understand perhaps more than in any other aspect of education, accessible technology can play a huge role because it creates not just opportunities and windows for accessing education, but also, as in Kenya, in communities, bringing people closer together, which is extremely important. But we also note that teachers are often not well prepared, or tend not to be well prepared to use technology. Of course, that's true of the use of technology in classrooms for all students, but even more so, the use of specialized devices is something that teachers are not actually well prepared for. Let's go back to the broader questions that the report is breaching quality. The key message of the report is that some technologies can improve some types of learning in some contexts. And this is really important because it basically says that we cannot have a blanket adoption of technology and expect to see miracles in terms of improving learning outcomes. Yes, technology greatly increases access to resources, can fill quality gaps in some cases, it can increase the time that is available for students to practice. It can personalize instruction, but again, that comes, as I will discuss later, with advantages and disadvantages. It can help engage while it's still a novelty, but it can also be detrimental. The report attracted a lot of attention about its messages on the use of smartphones. It was not as it was reported, a recommendation to ban, but we showed evidence that increasingly countries where phones are available in classrooms are complaining that there are negative impacts on concentration and on learning outcomes. And 1 in 4 countries globally have taken some steps to ban the use of smartphones in the classrooms, either through their laws or through their policies. And there's a tendency to focus on the devices, whereas we should be focusing on the learning outcomes. And learning outcomes can be improved even with technologies that are simple. In China, recorded lessons provided 20 years ago by trained and respected teachers with the support of less well-trained teachers in the classrooms, in fact, had a large impact on improving or reducing the learning gap between urban and rural students. We're talking about a scale of 100 million students being reached through such lessons, and even improving or reducing the gap in earnings between urban and rural workers. So solutions exist that involve the use of technology, but technology does not need to be advanced to have such impact. We need to think, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and deploy a tool that is cost-effective to achieve that objective. In terms of efficiency, again, the discussion is about a lot of promise, and some of those examples are really around us. Distance teacher education has been important. We know that it cannot replace, as with any teaching, presential face-to-face relationships between people in the classrooms or even coaching. But the cost efficiencies are so high, as the study we report from Senegal shows, that make it a worthwhile option. But some of the other promises do not seem to be materializing. There has been a lot of emphasis on computer-based and computer-assisted testing, but we don't have enough evidence yet on whether that is cost-effective. And the promise of capitalizing on the massive amounts of data that are being collected does not seem to be verified in practice, because the ability of those in the education administration to process this data and put them to good use is limited, even in the world's richest countries, quite apart from concerns about privacy and the use of such data. Online content has been a major promise, and it's true, we all know that. We have at the tip of our fingers access to all the knowledge, as much of the knowledge as we could hope. And it has helped improve content creation, adapt it, make it accessible, and make it also easy to distribute. Where digital textbooks have been used in relatively well-off countries, they have reduced costs. But online content comes with its own problems. It is mainly produced in some countries and in some languages. 92% of Open Education Resource Commons content is in English. And that raises the question of appropriateness. Higher education, which I mentioned before, is the one that has been most transformed already by technology, is increasingly relying on platforms. But the role that the platforms and the companies that support these platforms are playing is only beginning to emerge, and it is changing the role of universities as we have known it for the past centuries. A related issue to efficiency is cost. And the report notes that we often don't quite realize the full cost of such investment. First of all, the full cost is underestimated, and very few people request to use information on investing in technology that incorporates costs. So only 11% of managers requested peer-reviewed evidence before they adopted a new technology. And money, unfortunately, is not well spent, and that's perhaps less of a problem in rich countries, but it is much more important in poor countries. Even in the United States, 2 in 3 licenses of software that have been purchased were unused in the end. And what we saw for low and lower middle income countries, given the existing 100 billion annual financing gap that we have identified for countries to achieve their national targets, which are quite modest in terms of access to education, investing in very low tech solutions, just offline solutions in low income countries, and maybe school connectivity in the case of lower middle income countries, would increase this annual financing gap between now and 2030 by 50%. So there are important trade-offs that countries should consider. Many countries are also faced with problems related to legislation and regulation on the use of technology in education. This community is familiar with the peer profiles which we launched during the 2020 report on inclusion. We have continued collecting information on policies and programs around the world. In this edition of the peer, we have a range of information, including the low percentage of countries that guarantee data privacy in education, only 16%, or the low percentage of countries that regulate the use of personal devices in schools, which is just 19%. So, to come to the recommendations of the report, as I also hinted in the introduction, we have looked at the issues from the perspective of 4 trade-offs when deciding to use technology in education. There's a contrast between the personalization, the promise of personalization, which deals with a perennial perception that education in classrooms is inefficient. But we're faced with, as you know much better than anyone else, the importance of the social dimension of education. How children learn is not necessarily how some of the technology providers think we learn. And that's important because often not enough education expertise is put into education technology. There's a contrast between inclusion and exclusion, between commercial interest and common good, between short-term efficiency or perceptions of efficiency and longer-term costs. So we have come up with this scheme, as we're just discussing at the beginning of this presentation, just before we started. It's so difficult to have clear coordinates, given that everyone has a view about technology in education. So we approach this using the 4 keys, arrow keys of the keyboard, as a reminder of 4 key questions that policymakers need to think before they invest. Is it appropriate? Is it relevant? Is it improving learning outcomes? Is it equitable? Does it leave some learners behind? Is it scalable? Do we know the full costs, and have we done the proper piloting before proceeding? And is it sustainable in terms of not only economic, but also social and environmental dimensions of sustainability? So, taking the 4 in turn. In terms of appropriateness, the report recommends that the curricula and the pedagogies around the use of technology need to be rethought before we use technology in education. And we need to ask ourselves better questions whether these use of technologies are delivering better results. And an example showed that an AI-based system did no better. An AI-based system, which was essentially trying to personalize learning and was used by 25 million learners in the US, did no better than traditional teaching. And that leads to the recommendation that when we design such policies and when we monitor and evaluate them, the participation of teachers and students should be essentially that process. Only a minority of senior leaders in the United States had been consulted according to a major survey of the country. And these solutions should be designed to fit the needs of teachers. Again, a very large number of lower secondary school teachers that had been trained to use technology in classrooms felt that were ready to do that, even after their training. The second recommendation is about the use of education technology and its effect on equity. As I mentioned before, technology needs to support the marginalized, and as in China, also in India, simpler solutions, essentially involving distance lessons without necessarily the use of advanced digital forms, were effective in improving education outcomes in rural public secondary schools. We understand and support the idea that connectivity is becoming an essential public service, and we invite countries, and we have already invited them, to set national targets for the percentage of schools at each level that are connected to the internet at a speed that allows their use for pedagogical purposes. And we need to promote the digital public goods in education. We're behind the support, the effort that UNESCO and UNICEF are putting in to build a consensus about how such platforms should be. As things stand, a lot of these platforms are generating information that is not necessarily being used for the benefit of learners. The third recommendation is about scalability, and the report notes with concern that very few countries in the world have bodies that evaluate education technology, and in the few cases where this has happened, such as in the United States, only 2% of more than 10,000 products listed in the clearinghouse had strong or moderate evidence of effectiveness. And that should be used as an example around the world to make governments much more cautious and not be influenced by the need to be up to date and appear modern in their approaches to education. The report also notes that there's a consensus that the initial investment in education technology is only 25% of the final cost. And that's another warning sign before making a decision. Transparency of public spending is essential when governments deal with private actors, and it becomes very, very difficult in those countries that decentralize many of the activities to schools, because schools do not have access to all the information they need in an easy way to take the right decisions. Finally, sustainability. There are many, many dimensions. We do agree, we do understand that all countries, and about more than half of the countries, have some frameworks of digital skills for the future. Not all of them are broad enough, and the report advocates for digital skills that are linked to citizenship and not just to the world of work. But we also know that perhaps that's maybe the most powerful finding of the report, that only 5% of students in a study related to the PISA learning assessment, only 5% of students, 15-year-old students who took that test and had strong reading skills, were likely to be misled by phishing emails or related misinformation, compared to 5 times more of those students with the weakest reading skills. And that's a reminder that when we talk about digital skills, maybe at the end of the day, all we're thinking about is having strong education systems that deliver on their promise, and not something sophisticated, new, and advanced. If you provide the right skills, then young people do have the right, the preparedness that they need to deal with the digital world. The report argues that we didn't need to protect learners' and teachers' human rights, the well-being, the safety, and their privacy. A review of products used during COVID so that almost 90% were in fact illegally collecting children's data. And finally, last but not least, we also need to consider the material and energy implications. If only the lifespan of all laptops in the European Union had been extended by a year, that would have been equivalent to almost 1 million cars off the road. Extend that to the entire world, and you can immediately understand that we need to put some more thinking into this. So the report you saw is entitled A Tool on Our Terms, and the campaign, Tech on Our Terms, wants to put the focus of attention of the the international community on keeping the learner's best interests at the center of a framework that is based on human rights. I repeat, we need to focus on learning outcomes and not digital inputs, because many of these inputs actually do not improve learning. And digital technology should not be a substitute, as some advocate for, but a complement to human interaction. And that's a key message that may sound like a slogan, but actually it's really, really fundamental in our thinking about education. And with that, I would like to thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the discussion, especially how some of these issues relate to the concerns of your community, and suggestions on how we can continue advocating for the use of technology for learners with disability, with better examples that you think would help take us further in our efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manos. I know that you are planning to launch an advocacy brief, and I'm just wondering, Sue, since we've had a sneak preview, if you want to make any first reaction to Manos's comments before I introduce our panel.
Manos, after looking at the brief and the report with Catalyst, our co-chairs Diane Richler and Monica Cortez, we fully intend to endorse the report, and I hope that somewhere else in the presentations there will be clear instructions for how other organizations may endorse. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Manos, for a really comprehensive introduction to a very complex report. We've already had a number of questions from people who are participating from all around the world. Really exciting to see how many people from different countries are online. If you haven't introduced yourself yet online, please do so. But we want to now move on to some of the examples that really led to the conclusions in the report. And by doing that, we have a panel of 5 people who are going to make some comments. Juan Cobeñas is someone who used technology as a student. He's representing Inclusion International and also is a fellow of the International Disability Alliance. Caradwen Johnson is from ATScale. Julia McGowan is the head of inclusive education for Humanity Inclusion. She also co-chairs the Inclusive Education Task Group of the International Disability and Development Consortium, and also co-chairs the GLAD Network Inclusive Education Working Group. Sergio Ramirez Mena is Chief of Party of All Children Reading, a Grand Challenge for Development. And Dorothy Sharma represents the International Disability Alliance. I'm going to give the panelists a very tough job, because I'm going to give them each 2 questions and ask them to meld their answers, because we want to give a chance for the participants in the webinar to ask the questions and to make sure that Manos and the panelists can answer questions from the group. So Julia, I'm going to turn to you first. And I have 2 questions for you. One is whether you can describe some good practices at different educational levels where technology has made learning materials more accessible to students with disabilities. And also, if you could talk about how education systems can ensure that assistive and accessible technologies are individualized to students' specific learning needs. I'm going to give you 6 minutes and warn you after 5. Thank you.
So much, Diane, and I'll try to keep to my time. I wanted to just start by expressing my thanks at being asked to join this panel, and also to talk about how crucial this topic is and how pleased I am that it's being highlighted as part of the technology report from the GEM team this year, because as we know, technology really is a game changer for persons with disabilities. I accept that, as Manos went into lots of detail about, there are challenges with technology. We know that. We know that it doesn't reach everyone, but it's really important to emphasize quite how vital it can be and how much it can make a real impact. At all in educational levels, for people with a range of different disabilities, diversity of technologies. So to shorten it, I'll just give a couple of quick examples. If we take early years, for example, you might think that technology, what can we do with really young children? Yes, we can use technology directly for children, but also we could use technology for their teachers. And actually, that's another aspect of how technology can be really valuable in education. I can think of an example in Nepal. The team I'm working with there, I know we're working with the ECED portal, which is a sort of teacher training portal for teachers over there. And one aspect of that is early years. And those teachers are looking at inclusive education, and this is enhancing their skills in how to deliver inclusive early years practices, including making their own inclusive teaching and learning materials, for example. So it's a sort of more indirect way of how technology can really change practices and make things more for learners. So there can be a combination of low tech and high tech working together in harmony. Another example, more in terms of teachers, again, using technology, but perhaps in a more interactive way, where they can use technology to create their own teaching and learning materials, again, making things more accessible. I can think of examples in Rwanda and Nepal and Bangladesh, where teams are using, sometimes it's open source software, sometimes it can be paid for software, but it's where you might use picture symbol generating software, for example, to create picture books, communication boards, or lotto games, also visual timetables, now and next boards. These are things that can really benefit children who might have developmental disabilities or other types of disabilities. They really benefit from visual information. So that's a different example, more at the level of teachers. And I wanted to obviously add something about technology for the learners themselves. Of course, this could be accessible, more accessible technology, and sometimes it's assistive technology. So for more assistive technology is more specific to learners with particular disabilities. So they might have might be a screen reader, for example, or digital storybooks with embedded sign language. This is more specific for learners who are deaf and might have benefit from sign language being part of the story. And that's something that is being used quite commonly now, might be talked about later on. But I also wanted to quickly mention the AAC apps, because I think that is quite crucial. Augmentative and alternative communication and apps that really enables people who might not have a voice, who might be non-verbal, to be able to communicate through text to speech or picture to speech communication technology. So if they can press pictures, those pictures have pre-recorded voices on there, so they're able to put forth what they're trying to communicate. And it is a real changer for children who can access that. Going to your second part of the question, Diane, I mean, how can systems really make sure that this thing gets established? There needs to be one education system, first and foremost. This education system shouldn't see this as an extra or a siloed thing, something, as a nice to have. It needs to be integral to that education system. And in order to make sure, for example, that if there's going to be an e-learning platform, like during COVID, for example, many countries did that, accessibility to be a requirement, full stop. And oftentimes this was a nice to have, add on, didn't happen. And then the organizations were fighting to make sure after time that maybe can we make that platform accessible. So it needs to be thought of right from the get-go. And therefore you need strong coordination between ministries. So to make sure that, the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, all of these different ministries are coordinated on the delineage of roles, who does what, who pays for assistive technology, who pays for accessible technologies. They might be thinking, health can deal with assistive technologies. Okay, but where's the line between that and accessible technologies for EdTech? So sometimes that means there's a gap that falls through the gaps and then nobody's paying for it. So funding and investment is probably the most crucial thing to mention at this stage, and the communication between the different teams involved. Because if it's not budgeted as part of the education sector plan, then it'll be lost, and then it will be due to individual partnerships that work out as to whether it's going to work or not. I wanted, if I'm allowed, one more comment, Diane, just to mention that technology alone isn't going to do this. Right? We know from our experiences and all of these good practices that you need additional support staff, ongoing training, mentoring, support to the teachers, parents, and students for this to work. So unless you have all of that and that's budgeted for, there's no point procuring a whole range of wonderful fancy laptops or tablets or whatever it is. But it's not going to do anything unless you actually have that other support network in place. So I just wanted to make sure I got that point in. I think I might be at time, am I?
You are, but well done, Julia. I hope we have a recording of that because it was a very meaty presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn next to Sergio. Sergio, I'm also going to ask you to talk about good practices at different levels. And I'm also going to ask you to talk about how to make sure that technology is scalable, sustainable, appropriate for context, and equitable, all issues that Manos mentioned. I will warn you after 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Manos and Julia. A very good panel, and I'm really appreciated as the question was very good. I would let me focus on a couple of things. I would say 3 things. We at All Children Reading have been focusing mostly on pre-primary and primary levels children, so that most of the experiences that I'm going to share are within the sort of pre-primary, primary, and probably early secondary school. And I think, let me start by saying about that, one of the things about that I was, as Manos was presenting the how we're torn between scalable, sustainable, equitable, and appropriate. And it's always hard to find that happy medium or that place where all these technologies are meeting. But at least I think, at least from All Children Reading, we have focused precisely in those 4 corners to try to promote that work that has been done with throughout the innovators that we have funded throughout the last 12 years. Let me say that number 1 is high quality, accessible books. I think it's important to focus on the production. When first digital, in speaking of All Children Reading, we found out that digital does not necessarily mean that it's accessible. Producing born accessible books, meaning books that were meant for children with different learning options from the onset, is the most cost-effective way to produce high-quality, accessible books. Knowledge can reach more learners and in more attractive and cheaper formats through design with accessibility born into it, and using the universal design for learning principles at the start of the content development instead of adapting, which is what we usually have been doing. This applies to both content development as well as the production of production methods. It is important that, like, some of our awardees have used open standards, for example, EPUB 3.2 or WCAG, WCAG 2.0 to comply, so that they're compliant with multiple platforms. One of the things we have learned is that the more we can agree on more standardized, accessible formats, the better it is to build a library, an inventory of materials for children with disabilities. Also, with rapidly changing technology that allow for inclusion with content in sign language and the creation sign language storybooks, we can promote language and academic development for children and youth who are deaf. as well as their families and friends. ACR, our show, we recognize that there's a great need for guidelines to ensure that the development of high quality sign language storybooks in particular are made to meet the needs of the child. The other point number two, I would say, focused on free and open digital content. So we said, not only should we start as a born accessible material, but we would also, one best practice to promote the integration of technology is that the content, let alone the devices that are used, is that the content is all free and open. Free and open content clearly supports the principles for digital development that design for skill, reuse, and improve. We recommend, and our partners recommend, to engage and compensate work with local publishing firm, authors and illustrators and organizations of persons with disabilities. Very important to develop this content with their communities and countries in mind. In fact, developing, licensing, adapting accessible digital content can be a catalyst to enable content developers to go digital and grow their business. In most places, one of the examples we have been working at Ultramarine is with the Global Digital Library that has thousands of high quality books for early learning resources and available in more than 90 languages. There are apps that are already built and made to become accessible. So that is the second point. And I think this point about free and open digital content it's always a difficulty when I looked at the 4 skills. I mean, what is equitable, appropriate? Because because people are saying, well, how do we promote yet make it free? So that'd be interesting for another debate. Now, the third thing I would say is reducing the cost of content development production. So born accessible publishing techniques can reduce the cost of developing, printing, and digital content outputs in one production.
1 minute left, Sergio.
Okay, oops. So I would say the last thing I would wrap it up with saying is, again, going back to the key about digital doesn't mean accessible. It is important that we engage the ecosystem, important that the teachers are at the center, not the devices. The teachers need to be at the center to break those barriers with parents, especially those with disabilities, so their parents are co-creators or co-participants in the child's education. And last but not least, I would say is there are leveraging the local resources in local languages. Most children are unable to read and write or communicate because there's no content in their local language. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really helpful addition, Sergio. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn next to Caradwen Johnson of the AT Scale Partnership. And Caradwen, I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is about recommendations that you would make to policymakers to ensure that more content is available in affordable and accessible formats. And then also, if you could talk about, as Sergio did, about how to make sure that technology is scalable, sustainable, and appropriate. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks very much. I hope you can all hear me. And again, thanks to also for inviting me to join. It's really fascinating and already some excellent presentation and panelists. So I think I'll try and be brief and make a few points on each. I mean, with the recommendations, I think it's been said already, but we know that we can't actually reach the SDG on education if all children are not included and if all children are not able to participate in the education system. And so therefore, the access to appropriate, affordable, quality, I would say assistive technology, and we'll go into what we maybe unpack that in a moment, will make the difference between whether a child can access education. And so for a policymaker interested in inclusive education and reaching the SDGs, then my recommendation, as Julia already said, but I'd like to just, second her point, is resources. We need to allocate those resources to facilitate access. to products and services, and we need to integrate that into national plans, and it needs to be integrated, again, just to repeat and agree with Julia, not just in the education plans, but actually look at that multi-sector approach to make sure that these where it's unsure where this sits, that it doesn't fall through the cracks. So we need that commitment to the content, affordable and accessible formats, to be a core part of the national education initiatives with that allocated budget line, but looking across sectors as well and making sure that there's a cross-sector approach. And then I would say, when we talk about policymakers, let's think about donors as well. Who are we talking about? Because I think we also need to look at, yes, national governments, but also bilateral donors, and where we're looking at, the commitment to inclusive education. Again, where's that budget line? How are you actually integrating in that strategy to make sure that we know where to go to unlock those resources, and also to support those national plans to be developed? So I think, I could say more, but I think that's the key recommendation. But just to go back to what a couple of people have said, and also in the chat, Gila Fanu, and also have noted, it's a little bit also about, yes, digital technology, but also, AT scale, we focus on assistive technology more broadly, and wheelchairs, eyeglasses, hearing aids, etc., as well as the screen readers and audiobooks. And actually, we need to get those children into the schools, into education, because we're talking about leaving no one behind. If they don't even get to the classroom, the digital technology is definitely not going to benefit them. So I do think we need that holistic approach to looking at, how can we make sure that children have the assistive technology they need to actually arrive in the classroom and benefit from the education. So we know, for example, that eyeglasses, sounds obvious, but significantly improves educational outcomes. So let's make sure we're focusing on the holistic approach as well, as not purely the sort of digital devices, although of course we know that that they are also important and can really make a huge difference. I also maybe just wanted to touch very quickly on the economic argument. It's not just like the right thing to do, but because we have these, these targets and goals we need to reach, but also, for policymakers that are looking for the economic argument, we actually know that if we're investing in these technologies and giving everybody access, that a child can actually increase their lifetime income. In our investment case, we say that can be as much more than $100,000 per child a year. So we actually do benefit from the investment in these technologies, because the outcome is really felt, in every stage of the life cycle. So I think that's worth noting as well, because we know policymakers are very driven by by those outcomes as well. The second question you touched on, how does this use
you
of
have
technology?
1 minute for that one, Karen.
Okay, I'm going to go zoom in very quickly then and look at, we're talking about leave no one behind. So what can we do then to make sure that these technologies actually reach the people that need them? And one of the things that we're doing in AT Scale is investing in text-to-speech for underrepresented languages. And I think this is really important to look at, because this technology that large multinationals are investing in, text-to-speech is an obvious one, can really be beneficial for children and adults with vision and communication impairments, and really open up opportunities for education. But those people that live in countries with underrepresented languages can't access it. So we're working with 4 languages: Turkmen, Nepali, Vietnamese, and Setswana, to actually invest in the development of text-to-speech for underrepresented languages. And that's where you can see this education opening up for people that usually don't have access. And I think when we're looking at digital technology, we need to make sure that we're looking at digital technology for all, and where there's gaps, we're able to plug those gaps. And that's in partnership with UNICEF and the Ministry of Education in Turkmenistan. So just to say, where you see national government also committing to education, to inclusive education, I think that's where we can also really go in and support that and help them to achieve their policies, with additional support and impact. So sorry, that might have been a little bit rushed at the end because I had a bit more to say, but hopefully that point was made there. Thank you.
Thank you. You were very clear, and thank you for underlying the point that was made by Guy Lofano of Sightsavers in the chat about the need for low tech. That very often, especially for students with disabilities, low tech can be inexpensive and critical in terms of ensuring inclusion. And your last point about accessibility because of language is also really critical. We're going to turn now to Juan Cabeñas. And Juan is someone who experienced the use of technology throughout his education career and continues to use it. And Juan, we have two questions for you as well. One is the recommendations that you would make to policymakers to ensure that content is affordable and accessible, but also to talk about individualizing technology for learners. What can you say to us about that? Over to you, Juan.
Thank you, Diane. And thank you for this clear report. I think that AAC equipment, as Julia has said before, needs to be one of the elements of accessibility, like Braille or sign language. It needs to be available for the students that use it to understand and to show their learning. So these programs of symbols should be also in the hands of each student so that they can prepare presentations, do assessments, and express whatever they need. The other thing is about the need that states have the leadership in the adoption of technology. I live in Argentina, in South America, and many times it is the private companies that exercise the leadership. This can only bring inequality, very expensive devices that may not be relevant, and frustration, because they promise miracles and they don't give training. So what we need is leadership of the education authorities, a clear policy on technology, training of decision makers, of supervisors, teachers, and all those in the education system that have to do with curriculum and technology. Then teachers need to work with the health rehabilitation team in order to decide what training will the student have to use the devices and train also the support person of the student. So training is a main element of the success in the adoption of technology. The second question about personalizing, I think that the report makes a great point when it says, when it says that to put the person in the center of the process and to think in the outcomes for the person. Then I have to say that my situation is a difficult one because devices and smartphones and tablets are great, but you need to have a way to access them. When your eyes don't work well and your hands do not respond and you cannot use your speech or your mouth abilities to blow, then you cannot access these devices yet. So what I would say is that training, low costs, and strong policies about adoption of technology with the center process are the main steps to advance in the use, in the effective and equal use of technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan, for a really comprehensive presentation. And you've raised so many issues, some of which have come up in the questions. One issue that you raised is accessibility of technology for support persons. And that's something that's come up in the questions as well. You also talked about leadership, which is the theme of the next Global Education Monitoring Report. And so you've given some hints to the GEM team about things to think about. And you've also indicated the importance of the people who use the technology being consulted in terms of what they want, what's appropriate for them. And that's something that's come up in the questions too. Last but not least, we're going to turn to Dorothy Sharma, who's here from the International Disability Alliance. And Dorothy, we have two questions for you. Again, in terms of recommendations for policymakers, what's the IDA position on that? And then finally, the issue of how to make sure that technology is scalable, sustainable, and appropriate for context and equitable. I'll let you know when you have 5 minutes to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. I'll try to keep it within less than 5 minutes because I do want to also hear from the participants who have joined us. And it's good to see such an overwhelming number of people listening in to this webinar today. Like Diane said, my name is Dorothy. I am representing the International Disability Alliance here. We're a global alliance of organizations of persons with disabilities, and the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, lie at the heart of what we do. And I think to answer my first question, again, I wouldn't like to repeat many of the excellent points already made by speakers before me, but I think I'm not sure I heard the word CRPD mentioned, so I think I want to go back to the convention that really drives and informs everything that we do in terms of disability inclusion. And I would really urge everyone here to recall what the UN Convention says about the role of technology in education for learners with disabilities. And it has defined obligations for states parties to promote the use, research, development, production, and distribution of technology, making it affordable, widely available for persons with disabilities. And I think it's important for us to recall the principles that are enshrined in the CRPD, especially when it comes to education, especially when it comes to accessibility and technology, both in terms of digital and low-tech technology. It's also important to recall that accessibility is not just a right in itself, but it's also a precondition for achieving all other rights. And I think that's something that we really need to recall every time. The CRPD's obligations, of course, are very clear and holistic, a term that has already been used by other speakers before me. Technology and accessibility do not exist in a vacuum. It's interconnected to several other enabling environments. And the CRPD mentions that it is also the obligation of state parties, of governments to provide those enabling environment, the appropriate information of using technology, and also the appropriate ways of maintaining those technologies that are provided to persons or learners with disabilities. The CRPD committee has built on the convention's provisions by including them in their jurisprudence. So I would really urge, especially national level, organizations and stakeholders who are listening in today, who are participating in this webinar, to look at the concluding observations that have been given during the review of the respective countries, to see what the CRPD committee is talking about when it comes to the obligations of your countries, for example, in terms of technology and assistive technology also. Article 24 of the convention, which is on education, again talks about availability of necessary support, including assistive technology. So it's again something that I would really want all of us to take, recall as well as take away from this conversation today. The jurisprudence of the CRPD committee is available online. There's also a compilation that IDA had done, so be happy to share that as well for reference. There are other several reports which talk about the interconnectedness of technology and accessibility and education, including the former Special Rapporteur's report, where she mentioned that technology and assistive technology and support services are important components of disability inclusive policy. So it cannot be, like others have said, an add-on or a subset. It has to be part of everything that we do towards disability inclusion. And I think it's important for us to recall that, because many a times when you look at when you hear the word assistive technology or accessibility, we just associate that to learners with disabilities, which I think is really harmful in terms of how our systems continue to not change. Unless that perception changes, that it is not just meant for a section of learners, I think systemic changes is difficult to achieve. And I think at this point, we are all talking about transformation and systemic shifts, including, at the Transforming Education Summit, including at the SDG recently concluded SDG Summit. So I think if transformation is the key that we're talking about in terms of education, then we need to move away from looking at silos and looking at diversity and inclusion as being at the heart of education. I also want to signpost the Marrakesh Treaty. I think it's important for us to recall that treaty as well when we talk about accessibility and assistive technology. I think over 92 countries have ratified the 2013 treaty, and it is very important for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or have brain disabilities. And I think it's again, if your country is one of the countries which ratified this Marrakesh Treaty, then it's important to call for its implementation. And I think it's in terms of recommendation, it's important for us to really insist that we move away from commitments to real action. And I think the implementation of the CRPD, the Marrakesh Treaty, is key to that. I also want to signpost the concept of universal design for learning. Like I said, diversity has to be at the heart of education, not a subset or an add-on. And universal design for learning is really something that speaks to that. The other commitments that I would want to recall here, and
in 1 minute
also,
already.
Yeah, is the commitments made under the Global Disability Summit. There are many commitments under the Global Disability Summit which relate to assistive technology and accessibility. I'll come to the scalable and sustainable, technology for education. I'm from India, so I can tell you that we have a lot of technology which never move from the prototype stage to mass production. I think that's a problem. And that's something that we see a lot, especially in global South countries. And I think Manos also spoke to that. There's a clear lack of market research because, like Juan Cobenas said, the people who are users are not really consulted when these are being developed or designed. And I think it's important to ensure that proper consultation and proper research and data is what is driving innovation and design, because otherwise it just will continue to be something that, again, never moves from the prototype from the lab to mass production. Persons with disabilities cannot be looked at just as beneficiaries. They have to be looked at as strong contributors to the design and innovation of technology and assistive technology. We also didn't mention AI. I know there were comments about AI. I think artificial intelligence is moving really fast, and I think we are still playing catch up with just low tech and high tech technology, and we haven't reached that conversation on AI yet. And I think we need to make sure that AI technology also does not leave persons with disabilities behind. They in fact can actually be discriminatory towards persons with disabilities, because if they're not designed with diversity, it is hard. There are inherent biases that they entail. Procurement, again, if there's no procurement policies that ensures that everything that is purchased by governments, for example, is accessible, then again there won't be a market really for technology or assistive technology. And I think it's important to highlight that. I want to end by
I'm going to have
saying
to
that,
cut you off,
Yeah.
Dorothy. One last
no
sentence.
worries.
Okay.
I would again say that just non-inclusive and unjust systems do not lead to just an inclusive result. So we need to really focus on systemic changes and making sure that we are at the heart of the discussion, like Juan said. Thank you so much for your time, and really, it was really good to hear so many interesting presentations. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you. We've had incredible participation in the chat, and some questions, specific questions, and asked by people who are participating. Really exciting to see the range of participants. But I think that one key message from all of this is the focus on people with disabilities being in control of the technology that they have access to and what's being designed. So we're going to end this session in a couple of minutes with the co-chair of the Catalyst for Inclusive Education with me, Monica Cortez, who's going to be talking about a way forward. I think one thing that we will do is collate all of these questions, and as Catalyst, try to look at how we can consult with the panelists and maybe provide more detailed responses. But I'm going to give each of the speakers a chance for a 1-minute comment, anything that you didn't say or anything that you want to react to from the others. And I'm going to go in the order of the speakers of the panel and then turn to Sue and Manos before Monica concludes. And just 1 minute, if there's one message that came through that you think you want to highlight. Julia.
Thanks for that, Diane. I was just trying to answer one of the questions by writing, and it struck me that sometimes technology is seen as an either or a kind of, it has to be that and that's the only thing. So my message would be everything in moderation and to have a balanced approach. That's when I'm talking about more in terms of accessible technology. However, when I'm talking about, and also just technology for all children, in learning in school, it's different when it's an assistive device. If that communication, this is technology for a communication aid, that is just as much an important part of that person as a wheelchair would be, or any other type of assistive device. So that should be 100% all of the time, and is absolutely crucial. So it should be nuanced. Yeah, is that all right?
Thank you. Great. Sergio.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, I would say don't forget the teachers. They are the ones who are instrumental to giving the access, especially in the early years. Don't forget the social emotional aspect learning process that has to happen. We sometimes forget and then put the technology ahead of the person and about the child's emotional being. And last but not least, all kinds of tech, low tech, it may be the way to go, as much as high tech, depending on, but always putting, finally, as my colleagues say, nothing about them, about us, without us. So it's always bring, to the discussion people who are have learning disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Carritwen.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't need a minute, but I mean, I think just, I think we're all sort of saying a similar thing that, let's not focus only on the digital technology. If we do really want to achieve inclusive education, then we really need to look at those who actually can't even get to school or get to wherever they're learning and access that digital technology. So, let's take a holistic view of that, look at all types of assistive technology that will enable learners, and they're the people really at risk of being left behind. So let's make sure we don't forget those in the sort of this momentum towards more access to digital technology.
Thank you. Juan.
Thank you, Diane. I wish to say, let's not forget about cognitive accessibility, easy to read language, and to welcome this kind of events and reports that show what happens in the real situation of people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Dorothy.
I think, again, two things, that we cannot look at technology and everything in silo. It has to be connected to everything. When students are not even in schools, how do we talk about, the benefits of technology for them? The second thing would be just to recall something in the CRPD, again, the 4A and 1Q, as they call it, the availability, affordability, accessibility, acceptability, and quality of everything that we provide to learners with disabilities, to all children and all learners, including learners with disabilities. So 4 A's and 1Q, just trying to signpost that.
Thank you. Manos.
Just to thank you very much for this active participation and for the invitation. To say that what we also have available is an accessible version of the report and a Braille version as well. I think Sue already mentioned that there is an advocacy brief that was shared with the panelists before. We understand that Inclusion International is going to endorse it, and we are welcoming other endorsements, especially in the run-up to the Salamanca anniversary next year. And finally, I mentioned already at the beginning of my presentation that we have added finally the disability dimension to our World Inequality Database on Education website. And we do plan to have a launch event in December to draw attention and to raise awareness of this step that we have been long waiting for. As I said, it wasn't as easy as we expected, but it is there, and I think it can help stimulate debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sue.
I would be remiss if I don't think back to my son Charlie and his life, where we didn't have the opportunity for the new technologies. Charlie died 10 years ago. I have seen technologies expand enormously. But remember, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So many times, I think schools hope that technology will allow a child to perform or allow a child to be engaged, but we have to first recognize the equal humanity of every child. And so many times I hear people say, we had no idea that that child was in there or competent or paying attention. And the technology brings that forward and finally allows a teacher and a parent to see that there is a lot going on with a particular disabled person. So I think we should turn it around and make the recognition of humanity and dignity and rights prior to access to technology, rather than waiting for technology to reveal the human being to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Monica, you have the hard job of closing and suggesting how we might move forward.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Hello to the audience. It is a pleasure for me to highlight a few points from this important report and the valuable conversation we have shared with you today. The first invitation is to read the report. We have excellent conclusions and analysis on the use of technology for people with disabilities in the school context, necessary for all governments and also for the educational community and for all DPOs around the world. In the chat, we share the summary that in Spanish, and that will be of great help while the full report comes out in other languages. The report shows us the importance of technology as a resource for the education, but with its commitment from governments to invest in connectivity in devices that favor the autonomy of people with disabilities. It is important to always keep in mind cooperation agencies, governments, to make technology available to the less favored so as not to leave anyone behind. Teachers need training to learn how they can use technology, but also students, families, and different actors in the educational community, because it's not only to have a device, we need to learn how to use it and how we can take advantage of this. The school is a natural place for socialization, but technology can provide us with access to learning spaces. The teacher are the center and not the devices. That is why it's so important that both Julia and Sergio mentioned it is necessary not to lose sight of the fact that everyone should know and know how to make good use of the technological resources. Important, as Manos and Juan shared, to clarify the economics interest versus the interest directly related to the common sense to use. Just to give an example, some governments in Latin America, for example, have invested under pressure from commercial interests in providing devices to students who don't have connectivity, and this has resulted in the loss of that investment. Surely this event is an invitation to motivate us to read the report, but also to give our support as organizations to the report. To share with others and try to use it with our governments in each country. The Global Education Monitoring Report 2023 and our panelists today show us that we cannot lose sight of the human rights-based framework for action, where digital inputs will never be more important than learning outcomes by whatever means they arrive. On behalf of Inclusion International, the UNESCO, the Educational Catalyst Group, thank you for all to joining us today. Thank you, Diane, and everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,
Very
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.